Welcome to Big in Biz with DiViz. My name is Craig DiVizzio, and my guest today was Rachel Petry. Rachel, out of all the people who have gone through my interviewing skills class, was the best at it. And I picked her brain, and I loved her answers on how she prepares. What does she do before the interview? What does she do the day of the interview? What are the mistakes that she sees most people making? How did she just get so darn good at it? If you're interested in those tips, stay tuned. Welcome to another edition of Big in Biz with DiViz. I'm Craig DiVizzio, president of DiVizzio International, and my guest today is Rachel Petry. Rachel, I met her in Mississippi, and she at the time was working in North Carolina and came all that way to attend one of my workshops. Rachel has a special place in my training heart. I've taught interviewing for years now, and I've had thousands of people go through my course. At the end of the course, every participant does an interview. So I've seen thousands of people interview. There are those of my participants who they interviewed okay, and some people interviewed good. Some people interviewed great, but there is only one best. Listeners, you will only hear me say this on this podcast, whether I do it once or I do 100 podcasts. I'm only going to say this once. Rachel was the best interviewing student I have ever had go through my class. I cannot wait to ask her, just how the heck did you get so good? Were you always good? Did I even teach you anything? Or were you good from the get-go? She's utilized her expertise in interviewing to create for herself a fabulous career. And I can't wait to hear her talk about the transitions and share with you the magic that she obviously has captured when she's in an interview. Rachel, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Craig. I really appreciate it. For those that are just listening, I am blood red. I appreciate it. A little embarrassing, so thank you very much. Those are very kind words.
You know me well enough to know I wouldn't say it if I didn't believe it. I was actually, when I think you went through the class maybe twice. The second time, as I was listening to your interview, which I used to teach other people how to do interviews. You would do one answer, and I'd say, man, that's a good answer. And then you do another answer, and I go, man, I think that's better than the answer I would have given. So I'm not puffing you up any greater than you are. You really got a handle on this, and I can't wait to hear you share some of that expertise with the listeners. If you would, can you take us back and go through some of the positions that you've held and up to current time?
Sure, absolutely. And I will interject, I think you have forgotten that I've actually taken your class twice. So I will say the very first time you may not have remembered me, but the second time it stuck. So thanks for...
Okay.
So I've been with my company for 18 years, but I work for a large utility, and they also have a wholesale arm in energy. And so even though I've been internal, I've interviewed easily a dozen times. I've changed jobs about 8 times in my 18-year career, and I've sat in on, probably 100, literally 100 different interviews, interviewing other people. And for me, that has been one of the biggest opportunities, not only to be in the hot seat, but also to observe people that are in the hot seat and see different styles and methods and learn from people all along. So both classes, and real experience have helped me get more comfortable with interviewing.
Where did you start? Were you one of those people who had great answers but was nervous in an interview? Were you ever nervous in an interview? What was your starting point? Because where you are right now is you're a great example. But some people may say, well, yeah, but maybe she was already good. Maybe she never was, because so many people struggle with nervousness. They struggle with lots of things around interviews. So tell us from where you started.
Sure. So I absolutely did not start well. One of the, keys for me is to just get my game face on and have the perspective of this is a mutual interview, and not feel the pressure internally that I have to perform for them, but we both are interviewing each other to see if we're both a good fit. It's kind of like a marriage, or speed date. You want to put your best foot forward and show them who you are and what you bring to the table. And if it's not a good fit for either party, you don't want to make that happen. And so just that helps for me to realize, okay, not only are they interviewing me, I'm interviewing them, and I need to make sure this is a good fit for all of us for the long run. And I have a couple of routines and rituals. I'm sure a bunch of people do, but if you ever played sports, or for me, honestly, it was theater, you have kind of your routine of what you do to kind of get geared up. And there's really three things for me. I have a morning routine ritual that I do, and I know exactly what I'm going to wear, what I'm going to eat that day, what time I need to be there, all the things. So I make sure all that's clearly laid out. I've got my routine down. I put my game face on and give myself a lot of positive self-talk that I know I do a good job. I know I bring a lot to the table. I'm going to, put my best foot forward, and it would be, great for both parties if it works out. But I do a lot of positive self-talk, just knowing that I'm a good candidate, and feeling confident in that. And then finally, just breathing before the interview is really one of the biggest rituals that I have. I will hold my breath and do some breathing before I walk in the door. So a lot of times, if I have time to sit and get there early, I'll just really calm myself, because that breath is really going to internally calm my nerves. And so just a couple tricks that I've developed over that I find help me a whole lot to help calm myself before walking through the door.
Yeah, well, I like your first point, and that is that as you go into an interview, that you are interviewing them as well as they are interviewing you. I see so many people going in, please give me what you got, please give me what you got, even if it's not a good fit. Have you ever gone into an interview and in the process of the back and forth realized that it was not the right fit for you? And at that point, how did you handle things? Because I think some people may feel, gosh, now that I'm in the process, now I'm almost obligated, if offered the position, to take it, which would kind of bump up against saying, if I'm not a good fit, or I'm not a good fit for them, maybe I need to back out. So how do you handle that? What would you say to those people who are a little bit uncomfortable with that?
So absolutely, yes. I have done a few interviews where I figured out this is probably not good. I would say less so on the internal interviews. So with internal interviews, you know a little bit better whether it's a good fit or not. And I think there's less room for you to turn it down if you've gone through the interview process on an internal interview, because you should know a little bit more about whether or not it would be a good group. You can do that kind of work on an internal interview in advance. However, on external interviews, one comes to mind that I did do an external interview, and it ended up being a really bad fit. It was in the Northwest, in an area, they flew me up there, and that was really step one of like, this is not going to work for me personally. And it was just a really heavy industrial area, and it was, a job that wasn't super interesting. When I got up there, they took me through a tour of the factory, and just more and more flags of like, thank you, but this is probably not it. But I did wait, honestly, to have that conversation, put my best foot forward, really appreciated all the time they spent, showing me around. But I did make it clear, before they even got to the point of a job offer, I really appreciate your time. As I toured the area, I just realized, the location, et cetera, was not a good fit for me. So they didn't have to mull over who was the best person. I did it as quickly as I could so that their time wasn't wasted. And anybody would appreciate that. So as soon as maybe not during the interview, but quickly thereafter, with your thank you response, say, I really think, I'm going to withdraw my name, but thank you so much.
So that would suggest that you really have a good idea of the types of positions that you're a good fit for. I think a lot of, I was on a podcast yesterday, and it was amazing to me, some of the people talking about the hundreds and thousands of people who hate their job. And it's like, well, you got into that job. Either you were not a good fit for it to start with, or maybe it changed. And I understand that sometimes. But you've got to have a good idea of where you are at every point in time in your life, so that the next position, well, where am I now? What would be a next right position for me to even interview for? Is there something that you do, or how do you evaluate yourself and positions to say, this is where I'm going in my career? Do you reflect on that every so often? I know that one thing I do in my business is to say, where am I with my business right now? What am I liking about it? What am I not liking about it? What could I do to make it better? Is that something that you routinely do, so that if an opportunity comes up, you kind of know fairly quickly whether it's where you want to go or it's where you don't want to go?
Absolutely. And I think experience for me personally has helped with that. So 18 years of career, I can now say I understand myself well enough to know what I like and I don't like. I don't know that I had that opportunity very early in my career, but I was very, honestly just blessed to fall into a great company with a great team. And that really showed me what was important. So the top priorities for me, my number one priority is my team with. I could be shoveling dirt and working with a great team. That could be a lot of fun. It doesn't matter. So part of that, interview process, you want to know who you're working with. And that's a very fair question at the table. Is anybody in this room on my team? Describe the team, for those follow-up questions. Can you describe the team dynamic? Because that's one of the keys for me to be happy in my career, is that it's a fun team. There's a lot of growth. There's a lot of opportunity. So that's really something I look for. And the secondary for me is just the topic. So I am in renewable energy, and that is super exciting for me. And that is honestly where I plan to stay for the rest of my career. I've worked in energy in all aspects, and renewables, there's something about it that it's in the news and it changes and it's new, and it's doing a lot of things for the environment, and it's got all the things for me that are important values. And so that's something that I've been able to figure out that the last 7 years, that I've really been into that area. And I know for me personally, I'm going to stay in this area.
Yeah, it obviously sounds like I can even tell as you're talking about it, how excited you are about that. And I would think that you would get that when you ask that question, is there somebody in this panel who's on my team? Tell me about the culture, that you're also reading how they deliver that answer, as whether it's a negative or a positive answer, to see whether it's a good fit or not. What are some of the things
Absolutely.
you mentioned earlier that you've been on both sides of the table often, the interviewee, and you also as a leader, you've been in the process as the interviewer and probably also as the hiring manager from time to time. What are some of the things that you've learned about the process from being on both sides of the table? And I'll let you go wherever you want to go with that. If you want to talk about leadership interviews versus technical interviews, or group interviews versus individual, go wherever you want to go with that, because you've got a lot of experience on both sides of the table. I know the listeners are interested to hear what you have to say.
Sure, absolutely. There's a lot to say, but I've done both technical and leadership interviews for different roles, and I guess the one thing that stands out that I will say is, don't be surprised that everyone that you come in contact with during the day of your interview is interviewing you, whether you realize it formally or not. So one facility that I used to work at, everyone from, our admin who is at the front who, casually let the person in and would chit-chat them, that was part of the interview, whether they realized it or not. So we wanted a really good culture because it was a small facility, we were remote, and so we just wanted to make sure it was a really good fit, because these people had to work long shifts together, and that was really important. And so every person they ran into, even outside of that formal group interview that was, 6 to 8 people in a room, was actually interviewing them, whether they recognized it or not. They even did a facility tour with a person that would, be their coworker. after the fact, and they would usually walk them around for about an hour and just chit chat about, their family or what they were interested in, et cetera, just to make sure it was going to be a good fit for everybody. So that honestly is more interesting to me than a lot of more corporate interviews where you just, you typically just come in and you have the group interview and you leave. So don't be surprised in some settings that everybody's interviewing you.
Yeah, I get asked that question often. Is the person who is taking me around to show me the facilities, is that part of the interview? Absolutely. And people don't know that after you go through, let's say, the formal interview process, those people are called in and say, hey, what we know Rachel was really great in the interview. What was she like on the tour? Right? What did she
That's exactly right.
Did she badmouth the company? Was she upbeat? Was she somebody you wanted to work with? That type of thing. What's one thing that to you, you had mentioned what is really important to you when you're hiring, when you're the interviewee, that it's got to be a great team environment. That is something that to you is monumental. Is that the same thing that you're looking for when you are the hiring manager or you are part of the panel helping another hiring manager select somebody? What are some of the things that you think are really critical that people need to know? Hey, these interviewers are looking for this stuff, and you better bring it in these areas.
Absolutely. So for me, in my experience, I definitely look for a good team dynamic, somebody that is coachable, that is ready to fully engage and dive in and problem solve. Not that they're going to absolutely know the answer every time, but they're willing to fully engage with the team and help figure it out. So that is definitely one of my questions. I'm listening for those kind of characteristics. Are they willing to just self-start and self-motivate? What are times that they've done it? And sometimes you even have to just directly ask, right? If you're not hearing it back, that's what we want to hear, crafted in their answers. But if I'm not hearing it, I'll usually just go ahead and ask. Tell me about a time that you've not had all the information, or you don't know everything. How do you handle it? What do you do? And so definitely just a self-directed person that can sell themselves, but also seem to get along with others. That's just really important for our small business that we're in. So even though it's a large company, our teams are very small and we have to work together. And the team dynamic is very important.
How much research do you do? Because from having gone through the class that I'm a huge advocate of preparation. And the number one failing of most people is they really let themselves down by not preparing to do their best. Talk a little bit about your preparation. So now there's a job, and I know this may not be the case right now because you're comfortable where you are, but take you back a job. There's a job that becomes available. Walk us through. You talked about the day of the interview and your breathing techniques, and I thought that was really interesting. You've got that really well structured so that this works for me such that I can arrive at the interview and be exactly the way I want to be. But I know that it starts earlier than that. Talk a little bit about that preparation, because I know there are some people who are saying like, God, what does she do to get ready beyond the day of the interview or earlier than the interview? Yeah.
Absolutely. So I even have my notebook right in front of me that you see. So I keep this is like my dedicated interview notebook. And so I have notes in here from previous interviews, previous job answers, very similar to, what you describe. I think you've, estimated 60 hour prep. I would agree. Over time, I've probably been able to put in 60 hours plus. However, there's a lot of times that jobs, you apply and they close the next week and they want you to interview immediately. And so even the most recent job that I applied for, the turnaround was like, are you available tomorrow for an interview? And so you don't always have that luxury of being able to put in 60 hours. So that's where really this notebook comes into play. There are times that I have been able to do that. And so I can refer back to things that I've already looked at in the past. What are things I want to highlight? What are some examples? And even though some of them are older, it helps just kind of re-engage my brain of what are typical questions, what do I need to look at? So keep the same notebook, keep working from it. Write down the questions after your interview and what you would have said, right? Like, go ahead and say, I didn't nail that. This is what I really wanted to say. Go ahead and write all that down. And then it just becomes reading over this if you have a quick turnaround. And then again, if you have time, I write everything down. Here's some examples that I really want to highlight. So I usually have 6 to 7 examples, in that STAR method. Here's, the situation, the task, the action, the result, just bullets. And then I can choose from those depending on what their questions are. And then I even video myself. I know that's one thing you always suggest, and I hate doing it like everybody else. But if I have the time.
I'm applauding right now that you did that, because I say that all the time. It is amazing the number of people who hear it and they recognize the value of it, but they never push themselves to do it. So kudos to you for forcing yourself to do it. I know that it's helping you.
It does. It absolutely does. And that's one of those things, I get my first and my last question videoed at a bare minimum. And so that's one thing that I could definitely practice, just depending on how much time I have.
Is there any question that when you're in an interview, you go, as they ask it to you, thank you very much. You just laid out the perfect scenario for me, because this is a question I will absolutely shine on. And so you welcome it. And it's like, I hope they ask me this question because I love getting it. Any question, and why?
I love more open-ended questions. And why do you want this job? Ask me that all day long. If I really want that job, I can't wait for them to ask that question. So that's one that I always have well prepared. Obviously, the opening question is one of those softballs that I love as well. And the typical opening question, you don't always get it, but you hope you do. Tell me about your experience and background that makes you a good fit for this position. You know it's coming. And so you can go ahead and demonstrate, hey, I understand what this job is, and here's why I'm a great fit. So those are the most fun, the ones that I'm most well rehearsed and prepared for.
And now you know where the next question is. Any question that when you get it, you go, man, why did you ask me that question? If there was one question I really wish, and I know that you have answers for all the questions. I'm convinced of that. But is there any question that if you had a chance to eliminate it, that'd be the first one you'd eliminate from the process?
There are a couple that come to mind. So, one of my least favorite is tell us about a weakness. Those are always a little bit harder to craft. You address that really well in your book of how to work around that. It's still awkward for everybody. It's a little hard to answer that one. The other ones that I don't like, honestly, are role-playing questions. Those are my least favorite. When you're not talking about yourself in a situation, right, or trying to give them an example. I've been in interviews before that they're like, pretend we're a customer or a commissioner or a board and try to sell us a product, or tell us about a program. Those are very difficult if you haven't been in that role before or worked closely with it. It makes it a very difficult question for somebody that doesn't already have a lot of experience with whatever that job description is.
Last question to you, and I'm really interested in your answer on this one. And I'm going to call it what I believe it is, your excellence in interviews has benefited you in what way primarily? Obviously, there are people out there that hate the process, and I keep telling them the process, once you get good at it, opens doors. What do you see as the biggest benefit of having, regardless of how well you started, maybe you were great already, but you've mastered this process, and I know that has benefited you in certain ways. What's the biggest benefit that you see to getting good at this process of interviewing?
Thank you. I'm red again for those that are just listening. No, I do appreciate it. So one of the biggest benefits, I'll answer that and then I've got a follow up to that. One of the biggest benefits is just exposure. Most of the interviews I've sat in or been a part of, in the hot seat, has a panel style. So there's usually, 6 to 8 people in a room. Well, there are 6 to 8 people, I may know 1 or 2 of them, but there's several people who don't know me or don't know me well, may not know my experience. This is an opportunity for me to get in front of those people that may or may not be hiring me directly for that position, but sell myself. Hey, this is why I'm a good fit for that job. But if job, they're probably going to remember me. And sending thank you notes and following up, and even get to knows after the fact. If you don't know that person, hey, I was on this interview panel with you, and I'd love to hear more about what you do. It unlocks the door for other moves, in your career and development. And who knows, you may find a great mentor or a friend, or just something interesting that you never realized. So it definitely, I think of it more of as, opportunities rather than try to think of the pressure of an interview. This may not be the right fit for all parties, and that's okay, but it may unlock something that is really exciting in your next step.
Yeah, I like your point about being in the interview, seeing it as an opportunity, because I like to tell people, even if you determine that it's not a right good fit for you, you always want the people on the panel to want you, because there may be somebody else there. Some people may go into an interview, and once they determine it's not a good fit, they just kind of relax and they do a horrible interview. And now you're promoting yourself in that way, as opposed to continuing to do the best interview you can, realizing somebody else may be there who's thinking, I know I've got somebody leaving in 3 months from now, and I've got to fill that position. And my gosh, they may be whispering to the hiring manager, please don't hire her, because I want to hire her in 3 months. So I love that.
And that absolutely happens. I've done that myself. I've sat in on interview panels as the interview panel and said, I want that person, if they weren't the number one choice for that other position. And I've had it happen to me. Somebody's called me back and said, hey, I sat in on your interview and I want to talk to you. Happens all the time.
Yeah. Any last thoughts, bits of advice for anybody is either struggling with the process or wanting to take their interviewing to the next level? Any one thing that really changed your interview excellence and took it up a notch? You may have grabbed a little piece here, and I learned a little something there, but boy, when I learned this, that really changed the whole process for me. Anything?
I'm going to say fairly basic, but this is the piece of advice, especially for new people that are interviewing on the job, is the STAR method. That's where I always start. All the other tips and tricks are great add-ons, but make sure you fully understand the STAR for every single question. Whether it sounds like they want a full story or not, they do. So one solid example that you understand and can explain, the situation, the task, your action, and fully explain the result, and hopefully a successful result, right? That's the goal. But, explain how you were successful in that outcome that relates to, the question that they asked. So just having, a handful of examples already planned out in that mindset, that you'll be able to paint the picture for the interviewer or the interview panel, and they come with you and understand how you solved that problem successfully. So for me, that's the number one thing for everybody to get under their belt. And once you get that, you can just keep adding to it.
Yeah, and I'm sure those are some of the examples that you keep in that notebook. These are great examples where I've been successful, and boy, just give me an opportunity to share some of these with you. I'm dying to have that opportunity. Rachel, great advice. I really appreciate you coming on here. Again, like I said, you got a special place in my training heart. For people, students like you make trainers like me want to be better. You really do,
well,
because
thank you so much.
Yeah, you come into the class with an open attitude. You're like a sponge. You want to learn as much as you can, and then, as you shared today, you just don't close the book at the end of the class. You actually then start implementing the things that you learned in the class, and that is always the instructor's nightmare. Are they going to, when they walk out the door, forget everything I told them? And clearly, you are putting all that stuff into practice. So, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Craig. I really enjoyed it. And thanks again for all your support through my career. And I'm so glad to tell you I got the job.
and if you hadn't, I'd have hired you.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. Folks, that's it for another edition of Big in Biz with DiViz. I'm Craig DiVizzio. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay cool, have good thoughts. See ya.